Russ, you mentioned descriptive experience sampling, and that's one of the deep foundations of your work. For anyone not familiar with it, could you explain how DES works from the beeper signal to interview process? Could you perhaps take it further for them?
So let me grab a beeper. So I have a beeper. This is the beeper that I've used. I've used I can actually I probably still have this is the original beeper. This is the beeper from 1973, and this is the beeper from 19 no, from 2000 maybe, and I've been using this beeper. And this is the beeper that I have a patent on. This is a beeper that uses a little computer. This has a little computer inside it. But basically, this beeper is nothing more than basically a random interval generator. And you turn it on and it delivers a beep, which you probably can't hear because Zoom filters it out. But let's see whether you can hear a beep. Did you hear anything? No. So Zoom is very aggressive about that and effective and so I can't argue against Zoom for that. But there's a beep and it goes and it's a 700 hertz signal which sounds like beep. And it go and the moment that I am interested in is the moment that's right before that beep. So if I were to draw time going like this, here's time going as the thing beeps, and the thing continues to beep until you stop the beep. So you push the button on the top of the beeper to stop the beep, and time continues to march along like that. So this is time going in this direction. The moment that I'm interested in is this one right there. I sometimes say 1 microsecond just before the beep occurs. It's not really a microsecond. Sometimes I say it's a millisecond. It's not really a millisecond either. Sometimes I say it's the last undisturbed moment. It's not really undisturbed. But but this is the moment that I'm interested in. I want us to focus in on what was happening just before the beep interrupted your environment. So I give you a beeper, send you out into the natural environment, in your natural environment, doing whatever it is that you would normally do, because that is what I think is interesting. I'm not particularly interested in what you do in a laboratory when I'm setting you up to do artificial stuff, but I send you into your natural environment. The thing beeps. You write down in a notebook. It's a little 3x5 regular little notebook. You jot down some notes about that. You can put them in your phone if you prefer. I think the notes are better, but different people do it different way. I don't really care. And then we'll get so you get a half a dozen of those samples. You get a half a dozen notes in your notebook, and then we get together and talk about that. And we do that in what I call an expositional interview. And the expositional interview is basically I say to you, well, what was going on, Tevin, in the first beep? What was it? What did you directly apprehend at the first beep? And then we have a conversation about that, in which that's the only question that I'm interested in, but I'll ask follow-up questions to try to get you to tell me what was in your experience. And you're probably not going to be very good at it. And so you tell me about a lot of stuff that's not at the moment of the beep and that's not in your experience. So you'll tell me what was happening before the beep and what was happening after the beep. I was startled by the beep. Well, that's obviously after the moment that I'm interested in. And you'll tell me about things that you always do rather than things that were happening right then and things that you want me to hear instead of what was actually going on. And you'll tell me about all kinds of stuff that's not directly apprehended. And I will point that out to you. And I would say, Tev, you're not telling me about what I'm asking about. I'm really interested in what was actually going on with you. And my art is to be confrontational like that. So I will be very confrontational about it. I say, that's not experience. But the art of it is to be confrontational and have you recognize that I'm on your side in this regard. I'm not being critical of you because I will tell you nobody is any good at it on the first day. And I'm not very good at asking questions about your experience on the first day either, because I don't know what your experience is going to be like. So we have to learn together how to do this,
Mm.
which I call the iterative process, that we're going to get better at it as we go.
it's the 1970s. You make this beeper, you start to experiment with people, and DES reveals certain things about experience. What have been the most surprising or counterintuitive findings of your descriptive experience sampling?
So I think the answer to that is almost everything. And by almost everything, I mean that with not a hint of irony. When I started out, I was interested in thoughts. I would have asked the question, tell me about your thoughts. And when people started telling me about they were telling me about stuff that weren't thoughts. So that was surprising. And whenever, and I would say, and this is an absolutely true, not ironic statement, whenever I feel like I know what I'm talking about, I'm generally demonstrated to be wrong by the next guy that I sample with. And and I've had to cultivate that over the years, that when a feeling arises in me, like I know what I'm talking about, I know I'm in deep trouble, because I'm not going to hear anything. I'm not going to hear what you are going to tell me about your inner experience anymore. I'm going to hear what confirms my theory. So I would say a big part of my art, if you want to call it that, my big part of my art is recognizing when that feeling of I know what I'm talking about arises, and then working against that. I'd say that's a very big part of what I do. But almost everything is surprising. Some surprises are bigger than others, but
Well, one of the things was you found that inner experience, for example, occurs less often than many people assume. Now, what does that actually tell us about how the human mind actually works?
so that's not true. What you just said is not a characterization of my work, because what I have found, what I took you to say was that inner experience occurs less frequently than people think. That's
Oh,
not
sorry,
true.
I meant inner speech.
That I would agree with.
Yes, yeah. No, that's a
But
mistake. Inner
yeah,
speech.
okay, that's what I thought you meant. But I want to answer your first question too, because it's actually an interesting question, probably more interesting than the inner speech question. But inner experience does occur. Most people, most of the time, have something going on, and what's going on is their own creation. It is not. It is not just simply what's fallen on their retina or fallen on their stirrups and anvil or whatever their apparatus is. They're they have created something, and it is there in front of the footlights of consciousness. And that's true for most people most of the time. There are some exceptions about that. There are some people who have basically nothing going on in their inner experience, and they're totally successful people, but they're the exception rather than the rule. Most people have something going on, and that is a fundamentally interesting thing. And the thing that they have going on is their own creation. That's also fundamentally important for me.
Mm.
And by their own creation, I don't mean that they sit down and say, well, I think I'll create something and then I'm going to review it. What I mean is they're they're they are choosing what is of interest to them out of the welter of things that are possibly out there. They're paying attention to this and not to and not to that other thing, which is why I call it inner experience. So, but your question was about the people don't have a lot of inner speech. The remarkable thing about that is that everybody thinks they do have inner speech. And the question is, well, why is it that everybody thinks they do have inner speech? And one possible answer to that would be, well, because everybody does have inner speech. But that turns out not to be true. It turns out that my research, I think, pretty robustly shows that some people, a few people, do have inner speech a lot. And a lot of people have inner speech occasionally, and some people have inner speech almost never. And so if you take all of the samples that I've collected in my non-random 500 or 1,000-ish people that I've sampled with, maybe a quarter of the samples include inner speech. And that is because, well, So if your question is why do people think that they have inner speech a lot? I think there's two reasons for that, or there are many reasons, but two that I will tell you. Maybe I'll tell you more. One, one is when you pose the question to yourself, what I call the armchair introspection question, what's going on in my experience now? That generally starts as a verbal question, what's going on in my experience now, unquote, which puts you into a verbal, whatever, it puts you into the verbal realm,
Mm. So almost
verbal
like
mind.
a linguistic experience, sort of
Yeah,
changes the way or the parts of the brain you're kind of using.
that I don't know too much about, but yes, what it does, it awakens whatever part of the brain is required to do verbal stuff. It does that. I don't know what that part of the brain is, but it puts you into a verbal mode. And then you ask, well, what's going on in my inner experience? And what you find is you're in a verbal mode. So more or
Mm.
less, whenever you ask that question, you're in a verbal mode. But that's the refrigerator light phenomenon. You're only looking inside the refrigerator when the door's open, and you're only looking inside your mind, whatever that is, when it occurs to you to look inside your mind. So that's why the randomness of the beeper is an important deal. I don't want you to be looking inside your mind when you think about looking inside your mind. I want you to be looking inside your mind at times that are chosen by something other than your mind, like the beeper.
After all your years of research, what do you think is the most common misconception people have about their own experience?
That they know what it is.
Could you elaborate on that?
Maybe this is my first answer was a little glib or whatever, but I think people have presuppositions about their own inner experience. And when you ask them about their inner experience, they tell you what they presuppositionally know about their inner experience. And I think people's presuppositions are delusions. And so they tell you about the results of their delusions. And like all delusions, they believe they're telling you about the truth. But it's not the case.
Do you think there's a way
And
we could?
that's the fundamental thing. The,
Mm.
the, the fundamental deal is if everybody recognized that they were really delusional, sometimes big delusions, sometimes little delusions, but the fundamental part of the human condition is basically delusional. Yeah, the world would be a different place.
Mm.
Republicans wouldn't be arguing with the Democrats, and if they all recognized that they were really both of them fucked up and delusional, and as at the core, they pretend that they know what they're talking about and they're the good guy and that they know the right thing and everybody else knows the wrong thing. When it's probably true that they're both delusional. It's genuinely interesting. I've been doing the same work for 50 years, and it's at least as interesting to me now as it was 50 years ago. Everybody is different. Getting people to be able to tell you about their own inner experience because you have to wade through their own presuppositions and distortions and whatever. It's totally challenging, and it's a totally interesting and challenging thing for me personally to do. I, it's not going to work for me. It's the privilege of trying to have somebody tell me about what's actually their fundamental private experience, which is pretty cool.